Hello, this is Jamie Mitchell, and we are back with another episode of the Libertarian Censored podcast, going over all the posts on the Libertarian Censored subreddit. Let's get right into it. So first we have, how many times did Trump socialize with Epstein that we know about and have concrete evidence for? So far it's at least 20, mostly photos, posted by Helpful Feeding, and that's a cross post from the Pics subreddit. And the cross post is entitled, "The Lady Ghislaine was the yacht that hosted many parties in the 1990s. It looks like an old newspaper column. The Donald Sand shoes. Everybody but everybody at the party aboard British media mogul Robert Maxwell's yacht Wednesday night had to doff their shoes before boarding the plush carpeted Lady Ghislaine," Maxwell insisted, and his guests cooperated, including Donald Trump minus Ivana, who has a much bigger yacht and was happy to compare notes with Maxwell. There was John Tower, ex-Navy Secretary John Lehman, now Payne Weber, lawyer Tom Bolin, literary agent Mort Janklow, UN envoy Thomas Pickering, Peter Kalkala, owner of the New York Post, Maxwell's daughter Ghislaine, and his niece Helen Atkin and Macmillan, and the publishing house Maxwell recently took over. No one could tell who didn't make the final list, but we do know that Martha Smilgus of Time was invited by David Adler, public relations chief at Macmillan. She wrote the profile of Maxwell, which he apparently did not like. And yeah, personally, I think the Epstein stuff, you can try. I definitely don't think they'll ever, as I said in past episodes, I don't think they'll ever reveal the full files because nothing will satisfy anyone. Reddit, of course, only cares about Donald Trump. They don't care about anyone else. That's why they didn't really care about Epstein files for years until it would start. Until they learned that Trump's definitely in them. But yeah, personally, I don't think anyone's ever going to be fully happy with whatever they release in regards to Epstein. So I think it will probably just fizzle out as people move on to the next thing. Like now everyone's on to like Sydney Sweeney's American Eagle ads. And yeah, that's very much the modern media cycle, it's one thing, and then people move on to the next thing, and, eventually, I think that's what's happening to Epstein now, people realize you're never going to get a satisfying conclusion to it, so people are just going to move on to whatever the next thing is. That's very much social media, it's very whatever the current thing is. Then we have, "This truancy ends now. Texas governor threatens to remove Democrats who fled state" from share.google, posted by Ninja Lover, and that's an article from Axios, and was by Ninja Lover, and they added, "After Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton on X threatened to hunt down the Democrats and said they should be arrested, Wu responded at the briefing by saying that Abbott has no authority to send state troopers to Chicago, but we don't know what Donald Trump's going to do," he added. And yeah, personally, I think, if the parties were reversed, Reddit would love it, as per usual, I'm sure if the Republicans left for real, that Redditors wanted to pass, Reddit would call them out the childish losers that they are. But since it's the in-group doing it rather than the out-group, and then the out-group, they're brave heroes. I personally think Paxton's threatening to hunt them down is going a little far. But regardless, it's just Reddit only cares that the in-group is doing it instead of the out-group. Since the in-group's doing it, it's stunning and brave. But if the out-group did it, they'd be traitors to democracy. And that just goes to show you, Reddit has no values other than in-group good, out-group bad. And yeah, and when it comes to Reddit, and if you dissent from the official woke narrative at all, you're going to be in the out-group. And yeah, that's why, I really don't care for Reddit. It's all just a giant circle jerk, as I've pretty much detailed in every episode of my podcast to date. Then we have, "IRS allows churches to endorse candidates," from PoPublica.org, posted by Rohirrim V, and they added, "This seems great and excellent, and like it's not a problem at all. Yay, theocracy." And yeah, personally, I think the libertarian position is, every group should be able to endorse whatever candidate they want to. I personally don't think churches and other nonprofits should be endorsing candidates, but ultimately I think any group that should be able to endorse whatever candidate they want to, and that includes churches and nonprofits. Libertarian position is, anyone should be able to justify whatever they want to, as long as no one else is getting hurt. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have, "Prince Andrew and Donald Trump's sick conversations revealed. Andrew's a lot of fun to be with." And yeah, I reply. That was from thedailybeast.com, and that was posted by Helpful Feeding. And yeah, I commented on this on the Libertarian Party USA subreddit because I can't comment on the Libertarian Uncensored subreddit because they banned me just because it's not Libertarian or Uncensored. But anyway, I said, if I had a nickel for every single Reddit post that criticized Trump, I'd be at least a billionaire. Not to say that he isn't worth criticizing, eventually all the headlines just start to blend together. And I also added, Reddit is also ignoring the fact that sick conversations are quite regular on it. It's very much a modern den of sin. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for, all the constant orange man bad headlines. I probably would agree that Prince Andrew and Donald Trump did have some sick and fucked up conversations. But, sick and fucked up conversations are a dime a dozen on Reddit. And ultimately, the libertarian position is maximum freedom of speech. I'm not care for your sick and fucked up conversations, but if you want to have them, say whatever, justify doing whatever you want to. I might judge you for it, but I don't want to stop you from doing what you want to justify as long as you're not hurting anyone else. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have Trump snubs the Taiwanese president. And then in parentheses, Trump bends knee to Xi Jinping again, from foreignpolicy.com, posted by CH4Locks. And yeah, personally, I do think the U.S. should be supportive of Taiwan, but that being said, I don't think it's very much like in Israel or Ukraine. The U.S. shouldn't be putting Taiwan ahead of itself. And, if people want to send their money to Taiwan, just like Israel or Ukraine, they should be able to, but I don't think taxpayers should be forced to spend their money over there if they don't want to. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have U.S. reverses pledge to link disaster funds to Israel boycott stance from Reuters.com, posted by CH4Locks. And yeah, I would agree that the disaster fund should not be linked to Israel, just like the disaster fund shouldn't be linked to any political thing. But ultimately, those in positions of power will justify linking them to whatever they want to. Personally, I would say that one of the Libertarian Party's big messages over the next cycle, it should be going in on as much as possible as anti-Zionist messaging. I do think it's possible to be Zionist and Libertarian. Javier Milei is a good example, but both major parties being almost exclusively controlled by the Zionists currently, it doesn't make much sense for a third party to be Zionist as well. Plus, it's an issue that unites a lot of the dissident left and dissident right. And it's in a time as politically divided as ours, any common ground that can be found is going to be very much appreciated. So yeah, that's my thoughts there. I personally don't really care for this. I don't think the U.S. should be linking disaster funds, should be holding disaster funds up for people who are boycotting Israel. But if anyone wants to boycott Israel, they should be able to. I've made some websites with Wix. That's an Israeli-based company. So I personally, I don't support Israel and a lot of the Zionist stuff. But I might use an Israel company if I feel like it. But if people do want to boycott Israel, I do think they shouldn't be should be able to without being cut off from disaster funds if disaster does strike. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have, on Jubilee Surrounded, Mehdi Hassan asks a far-right conservative if he's actually a fascist, and the guy simply admits it, posted by Helpful Feeding, and that's a cross-post from the Pop Culture Chat subreddit. And yeah, personally I don't really care for Jubilee. It's just another look at me channel, that, it's all just kind of political circle jerking, and a lot of the people who they have or just want to get famous. This guy clearly just admitted he's a fascist so he could, grift off people saying, oh, I got fired from my job for saying I'm a fascist, give me money. And yeah, that's why I really don't care for politics a lot these days. It's pretty much all just grifting, give me money for doing nothing because I got fired from my job for saying something edgy. And yeah, I personally don't think he should have been fired from his job for saying that, but it's freedom of association and libertarians support that, so ultimately, I think the libertarian positions, if you want to give him money, but I personally just kind of ignore people like him who just exist, just give me money because everything's a grift at this point. And to an extent, I do think everything's a grift to some extent, especially these days, but nothing more so than anything political, I would say. Next, we have Texas Republicans just voted to track down and arrest Democratic lawmakers for fighting their gerrymandering effort posted by Ragnar OKXG, and that's a cross post from the Politics People Blue Sky, and that's a post from Brian Tyler Cohen discussing, and then he quote tweeted quote Blue Sky, I guess himself. Texas Republicans just voted to track down and arrest Democratic lawmakers fighting their gerrymandering effort. If Democrats re-enter Texas, they will be immediately detained. And yeah, personally, I think this is just all just political fear, like most things are these days. Eventually they'll come back. Like, they've done this before, and I did this a few years ago, I think. And I think the Oregon Republicans have done this before in leaving the state to deny the other party quorum for a bill. But, eventually people will just move on to whatever the next thing is. And it's all just theater, really. Pretty much politics is just theater, but government at this point. Especially in the Trump era and in the social media era, I would say. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Attorney General Pam Bondi orders prosecutors to start grand jury probe into Obama officials over Rust investigation from sg.news.yahoo.com, posted by Ninja Lover. And yeah, personally, I do think Obama should be held accountable, but it's kind of like when they went after Trump last year. It's not, nothing's going to come of it. It's all just political theater. The elites will never hold themselves accountable. It's a big club and you ain't in it, as George Carlin famously said. And yeah, I do think Obama should maybe get charged for his role in pushing the Russian collusion narrative. But it's never gonna happen. Just like Trump's never gonna get arrested either, because it's all really just a show, and they're all really on the same team, despite what they might want you to think. And yeah, it looks like that's all for today. So we're gonna wrap up there. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.